This video is brought to you by Nebula. On the political spectrum, where does Rishi Sunak lie? We know he's a Conservative, but take one look at the history of the Tory party and you quickly realise that the Conservative Party is a broad church. Having announced his plan to stop small boats from crossing the Channel, and with the government as a whole doubling down on the Rwanda plan, is Rishi Sunak becoming more right-wing? Let's take a look. When Boris Johnson resigned back in July last year, a leadership race began in earnest between Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt. When Mordaunt was eliminated in the penultimate round, Sunak and Truss had to differentiate themselves for the Conservative membership. Initially, Sunak tried to present himself as the moderate and the voice of reason. Truss made clear that she was a libertarian at heart and wanted to lower taxes massively upon entering number 10. Sunak advised caution and said that he wouldn't be lowering taxes, classing Truss's brand of politics as a fantasy. So when Truss's premiership crashed and burned after 49 days, Sunak managed to take on the top job, and many probably assumed that his moderate economic policy would translate into a moderate overall premiership. At this point, the Conservative Party as a whole was dangerously close to a split, with the Boris loyalists such as James Cleverly and Nadhim Zahawi, as well as the right of the party such as Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch on one side, and the moderate wing of the party such as Jeremy Hunt and Grant Shapps on the other. Sunak, again, at least initially, seemed to want to transcend the divide, telling his party to unite or die, and bringing together those warring factions into his cabinet. The problem being that such a broad church cabinet doesn't get us any closer to where Sunak's ideology lies, which is where the boats come in. Sunak has based his premiership on meeting 5 core pledges, ranging from halving inflation to stopping small boats. And it's this last one that arguably the most political capital is being spent on. From the illegal migration bill through to the expansion of the Rwanda plan and threats to leave the ECHR, Sunak is doubling down on getting illegal immigration under control, something that many governments in the past have tried and failed to do. Even putting aside the small boats plan and the government's Rwanda policy, there's more and more evidence of a rightward shift in thinking, not least his deputy chair appointment. After the debacle over Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs, Sunak and the Conservative Party needed a new chairman, with Greg Hand, the MP for the leafy metropolitan constituency of Chelsea and Fulham, eventually given the top job. Almost immediately after Hand's appointment, Sunak appointed the MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson, as deputy chair of the party, in what's safe to say was a bold move. Anderson is firmly on the right of the Conservative Party, at one point being branded 30p Lee, after claiming that food banks aren't really necessary as people can cook meals for 30 pence a day. Fundamentally, this all comes down to what Sunak is. His 3 predecessors as Prime Minister, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson and Theresa May, had, at least in the media, a clear initial label. Liz Truss was an ideologue, having cultivated an image in the shape of Margaret Thatcher. Boris Johnson was a populist in the mainstream sense of the word, pledging to get Brexit done, though whether he was a populist in the political sense of the word is a huge topic for debate. And finally, Theresa May was a pragmatist, a quote-unquote safe pair of hands following the Brexit referendum, at least initially. The problem with Sunak is that it's not really clear what he stands for, nor that he can effectively deploy Johnsonian populism. Sunak, throughout the summer leadership election and ever since, has regularly been branded a technocrat. The perceived right-wing dash at the moment isn't anything new when you look back at Sunak's history. Specifically, back to that summer leadership election. In July, when the polls pointed to a resounding Truss victory in the contest, Sunak, seemingly out of nowhere, proceeded to attack the Equality Act of 2010, calling it a Trojan horse of woke nonsense. He vowed in a speech to ensure that sex means biological sex, to protect mothers and women from erasure, as well as to shield children from inappropriate material. That shift was seen by many as Sunak trying to pander to the right of the party, where Truss's stronghold was. Although Sunak's views on social issues may appear to change to suit voters, economically he's always been on the right wing. Sunak ultimately supports a small state, was an original supporter of Brexit, unlike Liz Truss, and was even branded a Thatcherite in trainers by the Guardian newspaper. Despite all of this, he was branded a socialist during that initial leadership contest, having raised taxes to, opponents argued, socialist levels. There's a point to be had that it's not necessarily that Sunak is becoming more right-wing in and of itself, but that it's the Conservative Party that's moved. During Liz Truss's albeit short premiership, the Conservative Party became the most economically right-wing major party in the developed world, eclipsing both the Brazilian social liberals under Bolsonaro and the Republicans in the US. And if you cast your mind back even further to the Brexit days of September 2019, you might remember the so-called Brexit rebels, the 21 Conservative MPs, broadly on the moderate side of the party, who lost the whip for voting for the Benn Act, which forced Boris Johnson to seek an extension to the Brexit withdrawal date. That episode was amongst the first acts that began to shift the Conservative Parliamentary Party away from the centre ground. All in all, meaning that in order to be considered on the right of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, being more bullish on things such as the economy and immigration. So, is Sunak becoming more right-wing? It's difficult to say. We can't drill down into his head and work out whether he genuinely believes in stuff like the small boats policy, or whether he's going along with it to placate his party and supporters. It may well be that Sunak isn't becoming more right-wing, but rather he's always been right-wing. We've just not been able to see it, given how tied his hands were as Chancellor during the pandemic. Only time will tell. If that's not enough TLDR for one day, then you ought to check out our series This Week in Parliament, which has just made a magnificent return. That's not a quote or something, it's just a thing I'm saying. This Week in Parliament is the show where we run down exactly what happened in Parliament in the preceding week, breaking down the debates, laws and bills which otherwise you'd totally miss, and explaining what really happens in Britain's seat of power when you brush aside all the shouting and arm-waving. New episodes come out every week, only on Nebula. But that's not all. There's also the extended version of the Daily Briefing every single weekday, a bunch of exclusive explainer videos, some silly fun content, and all of our videos totally ad-free. It's not just TLDR either. We're joined by a bunch of your favourite creators, from Wendover and Real Life Law to Johnny Harris. Which means there's a whole load of exclusive videos, early access to loads of creators, and all the ad-free viewing you can handle. Signing up using our link in the description gets you access for just $2.50 a month, and is the absolute best way to support the channel. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on Nebula.